first question is, first of all, you had a baby.
Right.
I know that, I have a child as well.
Sure.
And that changes a lot.
Yeah,
it really changes the way you, perceive the world and put your priorities. So, the question is, it seems like things are going really well for you. I mean, you have the reality TV, the Southern Charm. What made you want to jump in to a U.S. Senate race?
Yeah, I just, felt impelled to do it. It was more of a duty. It's not about self-aggrandizement or, I take seriously, the direction of where our country is going. And I'm a student of history, student of the founding documents, the Constitution, the state constitutions, the Articles of Confederation, take seriously the Declaration of Independence. And, these weren't truths that the founders had just plucked out of thin air. They were serious students of history. And they had studied thousands and thousands of years of history and people's struggles for freedom. And like I said earlier, they were very hostile to concentrations of coercive power, and they knew what they were doing when they created these documents. And we could have had a majoritarian system or democracy, tyranny by democracy, or you could have had all these different systems, but they chose this to protect the individual. So, and I just felt that I wasn't hearing from the current crop of politicians, anything that I thought could save the country. And so, I know I'm an imperfect messenger, but I just think my message is better than the other guys. And no one else is stepping out. If it were a Mick Mulvaney running, there's no way I'd be in the race. But if somebody has similar beliefs, I wouldn't feel impelled, okay. It's sort of like I feel it's a duty, to give back. My family's always given back and contributed to public service. And I just think that in the, we have to take seriously our freedoms and not be complacent and guard them jealously. You have to guard them jealously, and there's just been an onslaught of big government, and it all started, in '37 with the court packing scandal. But,
a lot of people are excited that you jumped in the race. I know that a lot of people, they're just tired of the two-party system. You see the Republican Party, they say they're a party of limited government. You see crony capitalism. You see this constant expansion. Look at Senator Lindsey Graham's voting record. I mean, it's shameful. So a lot of people are fed up, and they are looking for that other option.
Yeah, he's a terrible protectionist, marching in lockstep with Schumer. And, you hear these protectionists talk, and, they say, well, we're for fair trade. I said, well, if an importer gets together with an exporter and they agree on a price, by definition that's fair. When it becomes unfair is when the government steps in and says, well, you got to pay more, because, the politician got a financial contribution by some company, and so they want to issue that company a license to basically pick the pockets of its fellow Americans and reduce options for the consumers of America. And a lot of these imports are the parts and pieces that go into our exports. And I think this whole protectionism business, which he engages in, makes us less competitive globally, because the products that we make and sell, 95% of the customers, world's customers, are outside of this country. So, I just think he's really been bad on trade. He's been bad on taxes. He's been bad on the national debt. And this, global interventionism. He's been bad on foreign policy. Horrible on foreign policy.
Let me, before we get to foreign policy, let me ask you this. He voted with Senator McCain for internet tax. Are you for internet? Are you for internet tax?
No, absolutely not. Even though that goes against ICSC, of which I'm a member, and that's one thing that they want, because they feel it's unfair to the brick and mortar retailers. But absolutely not. I want as low taxes as possible. And especially, one thing on tax policy, we need to go to a territorial tax system like everybody else, not a worldwide tax system, which encourages companies subsidiaries of multinationals that keep money overseas instead of bringing it back home where they get taxed yet again. It makes us less competitive. Say if we're competing against a German company in Ireland, you pay your taxes once in Ireland, 12.5%. The Germans repatriate that money back, they don't get taxed again. We bring it back, we get a credit for what we paid in Ireland, but our corporate tax is so high with state and federal, we're at like 40%, we got to pay another 27.5%. So nobody brings the money back. I mean, we've got like $1 trillion in orphan profits overseas. It could be creating jobs here. I just think the tax policy is outrageous in this country.
Now, I heard a pharmaceutical company from New York actually went to England to recollect because it's better taxes over there, the corporate tax.
Yeah, well, they have a territorial taxes. Everybody has a territorial tax, and not only that, it empowers government. You know, they're going after UBS and Switzerland and invading all the privacy laws, and it's just they want to go all over the world. And you know, if look at it within the country and the territorial tax system within the states. Like if I make money in North Carolina, I don't pay South Carolina state taxes on it. You know, I pay North Carolina. I bring the money back to South Carolina. I don't pay any more state tax on it. I don't even show it on my tax return for South Carolina. You know, I could go on ad nauseum on economic policy.
Let's talk about the middle class families. Let's talk about the family that it's their dream, American dream, to start a small business. But they're taxed to death, number one, personal income tax. The first question is, what would you do? Do you believe in eliminating the income tax? Second of all, what about the regulations that's totally killing small businesses?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, we got a consumption tax. I mean, that would make us so much more competitive worldwide. So, and eliminate all of the, the rules and regulations and the need to hire accountants and tax attorneys, et cetera. And it would be good for America. And then all these brains that are the accountants and the tax attorneys, they could do something productive. You know, instead of trying to get all their customers in compliance with the federal government, they're actually doing something else of service. But I just see it as a huge misallocation of resources. And the middle class guy, you talk about this, the regulatory state. They misuse the Commerce Clause I mentioned earlier. The court packing scandal. The Commerce Clause was meant to create free trade among the states, but they used it instead of being a sword. A shield against big government. They've used it as a sword for big government, and they've used it to regulate every aspect of our lives. And so people spend all their time trying to comply with all these rules and regulations coming out of Washington. It really is, it's an unseen tax. It's like the government says, well, we don't want to raise taxes, so let's pass some regulations which cost these small businesses a lot of money, and it makes them less competitive against, say, a larger competitor, a large company, which, a huge corporation is a small part of their budget, but to a small company, it could take all of their available working cash. So, I started out as a small businessman, and that's why I was such a strong proponent, of reducing the capital gains. Because I remember I sold one of my properties so I could reinvest and start other developments. But it turned around, I was giving all the money back to the government. And I realized at the time, Clinton was president, and he was talking about these jobs programs. I remember Ross Perot said, well, each one of these jobs programs cost $200,000. And I said, if they would just let me keep a little bit more of my money, I could create jobs. I could create a lot of jobs, and it wouldn't cost the government anything. So, I get this viscerally, because I started, there's a misnomer out there that my name's Ravenel, I've inherited all this money, but I really, created my own wealth. My father lent me money my second year in business school, because I was saying, look, I'm going to take a job in D.C. I was interning for a big developer. He said, no, I'll lend you money to finish college and our business school. But I went out on my own and was successful, and had to move to Atlanta when nobody knew the name Ravenel. They couldn't even spell it. So this is misnomer. Oh, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. But I went away, and so I understand. I remember getting a U-Haul truck and then a trailer to pull my car, and I had my Labrador Retriever going to this house. I initially set up an office in the house where I was living, and then eventually grew my company to the point where I could move back to Charleston. But so I definitely understand, your average middle class person and the deals, what he has to deal with, And a lot of these big corporations, they like all these rules and regulations because they raise the barriers to entry to these would-be smaller upstarts who want to start their own companies, and it keeps them out. From competing and bringing the prices down.
Speaking of Charleston, let's talk about the Port of Charleston. You know, Lindsey Graham always talked about Port of Charleston. Now, it's very important, even here in the upstate. It is very important to a lot of businesses in South Carolina. What, with your business background, how do we really fix that? With the dredging, some of the EPA regulations that's really stifling innovation. What do you know, if elected, what will you do?
Well, first of all, I think Congress has abdicated. I mean, Congress, they're the legislative branch. They're charged with rulemaking and lawmaking for our federal government. They've abdicated a lot of that responsibility and delegated it to the administrative agencies like the EPA or the FDA. You know, that said, I think the real problem we have there is the Corps of Engineers, which, you know, all of the non-federal activities should be either privatized or devolved to the state and local governments. Not only that, but the ships pay a barge tax, half of which goes to deepening harbors. But the problem with the Corps of Engineers is so corrupt. I mean, take a look at Katrina in New Orleans. That was not a natural disaster. That was a man-made disaster. They were building these levees, you know, on unstable soils. They were filling in all these wetlands, which were natural barriers. They dredged that port too far in and too deep, which, you know, all that water came in and created this huge problem. The Corps of Engineers is, you know, it's dominated by earmarks. And, for example, you'll get ports that have zero ship traffic getting deepened, and where the congressman or the senator is very powerful, and the cost-benefit analysis are thrown out the window, or they'll say, do it again, or we're going to cut your budget. You know, whereas, you know, you get at Charleston, let's say there's a freshman congressman or a senator, and they have a lot of ship traffic, but they're not going to get deepened, regardless of the cost-benefit, because they don't have the political clout. And so he's not talking about reforming the system and say, hey, let's get it out so we don't have to go hand in hand to the federal government. You know, because people think that, you know, if you get a congressman who's bringing back the port, oh, he brought back this port, but all that means he's participating in a system whereby the federal taxpayers in South Carolina have to pay for the pork in 49 other states. You know, so, you know, we have to take care of the nation. As the nation goes, so goes the states. And we saw that after the financial meltdown, which the government created in 2008 with the fall of Lehman Brothers.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. A lot of some of the Tea Party evangelical demographic, they'll probably be listening to this and say, man, this guy is awesome. This guy is it. But they're kind of hung up with the drug charge. And, you know, that may be an issue that may be holding people back. But then you look at George W. Bush, you know, he there was allegedly arrested for a cocaine charge in 1972. And then you have Mark Sanford. Yeah. And, you know, the voters voted for them. They gave them a second chance. So the question is, what would you like to say to them?
I would say to them, if you really wanted people to be more moral, treat adults like adults. Don't treat them like children. These laws are absurd. You know, say what you will about the teetotalers, but they respected the Constitution. They had a constitutional process. And they, you know, they prohibited alcohol. Granted, it's the only amendment to the Constitution that's ever been repealed. It's such a stupid law. But our drug laws now, they didn't do that. They started passing these crazy laws, and they're worse than alcohol prohibition was then, because back then it was just the vendors and the manufacturers who went to jail. Now it's just the mere users. You know, it's been a big boondoggle for local law enforcement. They get grants and they're incentivized. They can, you know, if you're doing drugs in a car, they can take your car, whether it's a loan or not, and sell it at auction, and they can keep the proceeds. So there's a lot of incentives there for a lot of corruption. And not only that, you know, there's 20,000 drug gangs in this country right now because of the war on drugs. You know, and we incarcerate 5 times the world rate, 8 times the rate of Canada. Now, are we safer than Canada? No. They're 8th safest country on the planet. We're 83rd because there's 20,000 drug gangs out there. Not only that, if something's dangerous, you legalize it. Legalization is just another term for control and regulation. You know, if you don't legalize it, the control and regulation is turned over to the most violent criminals on the face of the earth. It's a $300 billion business, and we're putting all that money in the hands of some of the most violent people on the face of the earth. Having said that, when you treat adults like adults, let's say somebody may try cocaine, he may engage in and do some stupid things, but you know what happens? He engages in a learning process. He learns from the consequences of his behaviors. And at some point, he starts making better, more moral decisions. You know, when he's treated like an adult, if he's treated like a child, you know, he's going to constantly be looking around the corner and it's like, you know, sort of like, you know, who are these people to tell me what I can put in my own body? I ostensibly own my own body. The government doesn't own it. I think that's tyranny to say, oh, you did something in the privacy of your own home. And not only that, it's such a corrupt system, because when you have laws that where you criminalize an activity where there are no victims or complaining witnesses, the government has to resort to these heavy-handed tactics like informants, the use of informants. So some guy who may have done something 10 times as worse than you, they say, well, we'll let you go scot-free, but tell us what you know on Thomas Ravenel, who's real high profile, and we'll get headlines, and you know, maybe we'll get a higher budget. And then the way they enforce it, you know, blacks and Latinos 13 times more likely, even though whites use drugs at the same rate. So the whole system is sort of corrupt. Not only that, 80% of the people who die from illegal drug overdoses would not die were they legal because there's no quality control. During alcohol prohibition, they were cutting gin with formaldehyde, industrial alcohol. So I think we really need to relook at these drug laws. And I'm not for legalizing drugs. I'm saying let's get the federal government out of it. Let's repeal the Controlled Drug Substances Act of 1971. Let's get rid of the DEA, which is not only harming our own country with these stupid laws, but they're in 83 other different countries. And get rid of the Office of the Drug Control Policy. And let's let the states figure it out. You know, some states may want to legalize it. Some states, you know, let them pass laws that reflect the values of their own people, and then people can vote with their feet. Some states may get it right. You know, it's the laboratories of democracy.
Yeah, like Colorado and Washington.
Yeah, well, some states will get it wrong, but that wrongness won't infect the other 49. If one state gets it right, you know, the other 49 can replicate it. Or, you know, when they repealed alcohol prohibition, they didn't legalize alcohol for the whole country. In fact, to this day, there are counties that are dry. Okay, they said, we're going to leave it to the states. You know, they said, look, we're going to leave it to the states. We're getting out of the business and let the states regulate it. And they repealed the Volstead Act, which was the enabling legislation of alcohol prohibition. So that's what I would say. Yeah. Let's leave it to the states. South Carolina still wants to keep it illegal, fine.
As far as medical marijuana, I know it's really helping families with. You know, I know it's more of a state's issue, but I know that some.
It's a federal issue too.
Yeah, some have actually moved to Colorado where it's really helping their child with epilepsy and things like that, and I know that South Carolina. With Tom Davis passed his bill is, you know, saw some traction. So, are you for that?
Yeah. Again, I think that the federal government should get out of the business, because here's what happens. You know, somebody will open up a medical marijuana dispensary. You know, the Chamber of Commerce will be there, the mayor will be there, they'll cut a ribbon, and then the next day, the federal government raids the establishment and everybody goes to jail. You know, you've got to get the federal government out of it and let the states experiment. Not only that, you know, you have the Justice Department saying, hey, let's see if we can stretch the First Amendment or shrink the First Amendment and go after the LA, some of these newspapers that are advertising medical marijuana dispensaries. And then you have the ATF saying, hey, we want anybody who's got a medical marijuana card, we want to prohibit them from owning guns. That's a violation of Second Amendment rights. Then you have the IRS going out to these medical marijuana dispensaries and saying you can't take the same write-offs as everyone else. And then you've got the Justice Department going after landlords and say, you know, if they tell them they can't lease to operations that are medical marijuana dispensaries. So the federal government has got to get out of this. I mean, I was listening to Melissa Etheridge, you know, who's going through chemotherapy, and she said, look, her doctor said, hey, here are the 20 drugs you have to take, you know, for cancer. And you're going to have, like, all of these side effects, and here's another 20 pills you can take for all the side effects. And you're still going to feel terrible. Or, and you didn't hear it from me, because I don't want to be arrested and go to jail, or you can just smoke a joint. You know, again, you know, it's like the FDA it takes $1 billion to get a drug approved. I mean, why can't, if somebody's going to die, why can't they sign a waiver, say I'm not going to sue anybody, why can't I try these experimental drugs that may save my life?
Right.
I mean, the federal government is getting in the way of people, either saving their life or making their life less miserable by smoking marijuana. I just think, it's entwined in human nature, for some people to want to engage in a mind-altering substance. I don't think the government should be in the business of legislating taste. For example, if you want to engage in a mind-altering substance, you can smoke cigarettes, which kill 6 million people every year on the planet. But if you smoke a reefer, which has never killed a single person in the history of mankind, that makes you a criminal. Okay? And so, I've got a lot of problems. I could talk all day about the drug programs, but I think that the federal government needs to get out of it completely. I'm running for federal office. Let the states experiment. They're the laboratories of democracy, and let them pass laws that reflect the values of their citizens. And then if you don't like the policy, you can vote with your feet and go to the next state. But these one-size-fits-all policies out of Washington, they're wrong. They're wrong for the whole country. The only way you can escape it is to leave the country. Right,
that's true. Let me ask you this. Lindsey Graham said he was fine with the NSA looking at his phone records. Number one, are you okay with that? And tell me about your thoughts on privacy. That's a big issue to a lot of people.
Well, I believe strongly in the Fourth Amendment. People need to be secure in their persons, their houses, their effects, and their papers. And if you want to look at something, you need to have probable cause, get a warrant from a judge. For these people that go and look into your emails, I'll give you an example of why it's dangerous. Back in the 60s, during the Kennedy administration, there was suspicion, I guess it was J. Edgar Hoover, there was suspicion that our senators were colluding with some of the leaders down in the Caribbean nations. And so they started spying on the senators. Well, what happened was they found out that there was no illegality going on. But they realized they had valuable information on these senators, which they then used to extort the senators to support policies that the administration wanted. Sensitive, private information. I don't want the government having that information, because then they can extort any of us. They can twist our arm to do anything. I don't want the government. And now with this metadata collection, they said they can't look at the information. They can only look at it they can't look at it in all these rules, but they can change the rules. I mean, I don't trust the government not to change those rules. I don't want the government, for a number of reasons, going through my personal data, my financial information, my private data, my medical, records, any of that. They have no business doing this. That's not the role of government. The role of government is to secure our rights, and getting back to the drug war. It's not to protect us from ourselves. It's to protect us from others who may violate those rights through force or fraud. And, as a libertarian, I'm not, anti-law per se, but I'm for limited government. Government is force. It's violence. It's a threat of violence. And I just really think, and I said it earlier, we need to rethink our relationship to government. In the power phrase, John F. Kennedy, ask not what our country can do for us, but what we can do for ourselves. And wherever necessary for other people. As individuals and organizations. And the Constitution enables the government in a very limited way, and it enables people by leaving them free in every other way. So we need to be left alone to solve a lot of our own problems. And I think there's a breakdown in society when, whenever there's a problem, the government's going to take care of it. We can't take care of ourselves or our friends or our neighbors. And most of the problems they're trying to solve, that they purport to solve, they make worse. And there's all these unintended consequences. So, I look forward to the day when the school children come and visit the Capitol or the state Capitol and ask not, what laws did you pass today, but what laws did you repeal today?
Speaking of along those lines, let's talk about foreign policy. It's been in the news a lot. You have this battle between Senator Rand Paul and Dick Cheney with the whole thing that's going on in the Iraq War. Now Graham, we all know him as a pretty big war hawk.
Right.
He wanted us to bomb Syria.
Right.
So the question is, why are we arming rebels in Syria that has connections with Al Qaeda, and why are we surprised that there's chaos in Iraq? And now there's a push to get back into Iraq. So do you believe that we should join a jihad and a religious civil war in Syria?
Absolutely not. I think it's lunacy. And the reason he's pushing for all this is take a look at what Eisenhower said. And nobody could accuse him of being a dove. 5-star general. Beware the industrial military complex. Beware this armaments industry. And, I want an innovative, creative, prosperous, growing economy that can, in the event that there's a real threat out there like Nazi Germany or the rise of the Soviet Union, that can quickly expand. But we need a military strategy to reflect the true threats out there. And I think they've exploited terrorism and made it an excuse to have this huge military that we don't need. Again, the terrorists, they're hidden, lightly armed. It's not about killing them, it's about finding them. And that takes intel, it takes special ops, drones. It doesn't take a lot of money. We already spend 50% of the world's budget, on military. The military budget, we spend 50%. Most of the other 50% is spent by our friends and neighbors. The only state actors that are enemies are, Iran, Syria, North Korea. They have a combined budget of $10 billion, 1/60th of what we spend. And I think that's absurd. It's like we arm these rebels this week, and then we find out they're allied with Al Qaeda or ISIS, or the Muslim Brotherhood, and then we end up having to fight them, and they have the guns and the weapons, and the M60s are the anti-air launchers that we gave them, and then we end up wanting to arm some other group that ends up being our friend this week but the enemy next week. It's absurd. Or we go around picking leaders like Maliki in Iraq, or Karzai in Afghanistan. The CIA said he's the greatest guy since Churchill, and then now he's the worst guy since Hitler. We can't engage in nation building, or and not only that, they say, well, we have to do this because it'll be a safe haven for terrorists. But terrorists don't want to be in a failed state. They need the same things we need, like communication, internet, all these things. In Afghanistan, the Taliban, they ran the government. They were the government. It wasn't, So I think it's this whole notion of our military engaging in nation building, or a lot of these humanitarian efforts around the world. I mean, our military is there to provide defense against enemies. We're in a safe position. But this thing about the terrorism, trying to go around scaring people, there's levels of acceptable risk. Okay, the Foreign Affairs article just came out. He said there's a 1 in 3.5 million chances you will die from terrorism. The chances that you will drown are 1 in 900,000. So you're 4 times more likely to drown than be killed by a terrorist. So my question to you is, should we bankrupt the country, eviscerate our Fourth Amendment rights, and run our republic into the ground so that we can make it 5 times, less than 5 times likely that you're going to die drowning in a bathtub than being killed by a terrorist?
Right.
Even though I think what we're doing is counterproductive. It'll probably increase the chance of being killed by a terrorist. Right.
You have $50 billion a year that goes to foreign aid. Are you for cutting foreign aid?
I think foreign aid is counterproductive. It goes to these corrupt governments, and it delays the point in time in which they would actually make true and needed reforms, because they use the money to strengthen their military, to steal money from their people, and it it puts off the day in which they will actually make true reforms and institute the rule of law. What we need to do is export democratic institutions, the rule of law, enforcement of contracts, stable currency, free trade. These certain institutions will lead to prosperity in these countries. But, you know, I agree with what George Will said. You know, nation building is like orchid building. You know, it has to happen organically. You can't create an orchid. To create in America, you need a Thomas Jefferson, a James Madison, you know, George Washington. You know, we can't go over there and at a point of gun, you know, remake these people in our image and democratize and handpick their leaders. I mean, they're going to reject that. I mean, a lot of people don't want to be like America.
Yeah.
I mean, these people, you know, it's like in Beirut in 1983, 271 Marines were killed. And Reagan didn't say, oh, we're going to get back at these people. He said, we're going to pull out of there. We don't understand these people. You know, they're crazy. They're got all these outrageous religious beliefs. He did the smart thing. And no one can accuse Reagan of being, you know, Graham says he's a Reagan Republican, but he's not.
Right.
Reagan says would have gotten out of there. We need to get out of the Middle East. The reason we got into the Middle East is because we were fearful that the Soviet Union was going to come in and take the oil. But you see, the Soviet Union already has a lot of oil. And when you have a lot of oil, the last thing you want to do is open up other alternative supplies. It's sort of like De Beers diamond in South Africa. They pay the Russian government not to open up their diamond mines, you know, because, you know, if the demand is and if the supply increases too much and the demand doesn't go up a commensurate amount, prices drop. So they said if we open up all this oil, the price of our oil is going to go down. So I think it was unrealistic to go in there. And, you know, oil is fungible. You know, they said we have to go in there and protect the oil or protect the Straits of Hormuz. You know, if they don't sell us this oil, they starve to death. Okay, and you take OPEC. I mean, they lie. They're not going to honor any commitments. They may say, okay, we're not going to sell oil to the Americans, and you know, so one of these oil ships may leave Saudi Arabia, for example. Let's say they're heading to France, 100 miles out to sea. They're going to make a left turn, and come straight to America. You know, but even if we had to get our oil through a third-party intermediary, and let's say there's a premium associated with buying it through a third-party intermediary, that premium would pale in comparison to what we're spending over there now, and to the lives and the blood and the treasure that we're losing in these conflicts that are making a situation worse. When you topple one of these autocrats, because it's this oil curse, you know, the vacuum is filled with chaos and disorder. You know, look what we did in Libya. We said, well, you know, Gaddafi was a bad guy, but recently he denounced weapons of mass destruction. There was order there. They were putting down these rebels, okay? His son said the conflict will be over tomorrow. But we got involved. We gave air cover to the rebels. Okay, so extended that conflict another, I don't know, 11 weeks. Instead of 1,000 people dying, 11,000 people died. Then these rebels we were helping, they killed and committed genocide against 30 to 40,000 ethnic Africans. Okay, then the Benghazi, debacle happened. So, you know, and Lindsay was a cheerleader for all this. He ought to be investigating himself instead of blaming Obama for the Benghazi. And then what happened? Then all the forces that were allied with Gaddafi went down in Mali. They allied with Al-Qaeda. They took over the government, which was the only democracy in North Africa. And now it's a safe haven for Al-Qaeda. You know, so they don't know what they're doing. They're wasting money, but it's enriching their financial backers, the military-industrial complex. We should deploy troops out of the Middle East, out of Japan, out of South Korea, out of Europe. The EU has a GDP larger than the United States. They need to start defending themselves. And we need to redeploy them back to America and stop engaging in all these missions. I mean, we have a very safe country, you know, to the north and south, docile, friendly allies, and we're flanked on the east and west by massive oceans. We have over 1,000 warheads that can be launched from 3 different platforms, air, land, sea. Anybody foolish enough to mess with the US of A, we could obliterate in a moment's notice. And yet, you know, when we do task the Pentagon to reduce its budget, who's out there fighting for the A-10, which the Pentagon doesn't even want? So you got to follow the money. Well, why is he doing that?
Right.
You know, so look at sequestration. He was against that because they were going to cut the military budget. You know, it's absurd. And so I see this collision going on between the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats are saying, pay for our welfare state and we'll allow you more money for your warfare state.
Right.
And your average taxpayer, tapped out taxpayer, is getting the shaft.
So it's really a one-party system instead of a two-party system at that point.
Well, yeah. And the other thing is they use, you know, I think it was a guy named Bourne, he's a historian. He said, you know, it's the health of the state. War is the health of the state. They use it as an excuse to take our freedoms away, you know, allegedly to protect us from the terrorist threat. But I just see it for what it is.
Are Americans waking up, though? Do you think they are?
Absolutely. I think poll after poll shows them moving away from the grand position. And they're realizing, look, you know, that Iraq was a complete disaster, you know, and we need to not reinvade this country, and we need to get out of these conflicts. You know, we got 1,600 amputees have come back. It's great for the prosthetics industry, you know, but, you know, a third of the people have served over there have post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yeah.
You know, we spent $4 to $6 trillion over there. I mean, just think what that could have done for our economy.
You know, let's talk about that. What is, you know, the VA? It's very frustrating because
that's Exhibit A of government health care, and we're all going to be facing that situation. You want government health care? There it is. That's Exhibit A.
It seems like no one has the fortitude or the political will to really say enough is enough. We're going to reform that and just say it like it is. I mean, it seems like there's nothing getting done. What kind of leadership are you going to show to?
Well, first of all, you just can't throw more money at it.
Right.
You know, I think our healthcare system needs to. We need to liberate it from all these rules and regulations, and you know, I mean, take Medicare. I mean, the central planning. You know, they may underprice one service or procedure, and that means nobody can get that procedure, or they ration that. Or they may overprice another procedure, and then everyone's getting a procedure they don't need.
Right.
Because they don't allow the free market to engage in the pricing. So,
and as far as like the fact that I can't buy across state lines.
Yeah, you can't buy health insurance across state lines. I think that's a violation of interstate commerce. I mean, the Commerce Clause was designed to prevent protectionism between the states. And all that does is, you know, everybody goes to their local state capital, pays off the local politicians. I mean, the local politicians would be just as bad as the federal politicians. And, you know, if you just want to buy a Hyundai, it's like, no, you got to buy this Bentley or a Rolls Royce. You know, everybody gets all of these mandates, you know, for, you know, chiropractic or drug treatment or whatever it is. And you can't get the economies of scale because you're in such a small market. And there's that, and the other problem is getting by across state lines, and what's the other thing that would bring down cost that everybody talks about? I can't remember.
Well, I know I've spoken with a number of doctors who are just done with insurance altogether. They're going primary direct care, where they're just cash only, and it's very inexpensive the way they structure the payment because they don't have the administration costs to deal with.
Yeah.
And not all doctors can do that, but they're really enjoying. The customers love it. The doctors, it's transparent.
Well, when you got Medicare and Medicaid, the incentives are to comply with all the government regulations to get the reimbursement. There's no incentive to deliver your customer service or quality care. You know, you're getting treatments you don't need, or the care that you do need is being rationed depending on how the central planners are pricing things. And you know, so it's sort of crazy out in Canada that you know to get a CAT scan you'd have to wait like 6 months, or you could pay but if your animal wanted it, your dog, you could pay $200 cash and get it instantaneously. I mean, that was the free market. But I think that policy was eventually struck down by their Supreme Court in Canada. But you know, they say, well, you know, the government has to be involved in healthcare because it's something you absolutely need. I'm like, well, what about food? You know, why don't we just have the government take over, you know, all the food stores? You know, it's crazy. You know, and then they demonize vouchers. But you know, what's food stamps? It's nothing but a voucher. I mean, they don't tell poor people, okay, you live here, you got to go to this grocery store, government-run grocery store. I mean, they'd be screaming in the streets. They like having their food stamps. It's nothing more than a voucher. So give the poor people vouchers. They need to, government needs to get out of healthcare. You know, it's just, you know, it's like this guy Friedman. He's the guy that Sam's always talking about. Friedman. You got two economies. It's like the Flintstones and the Jetsons. In one economy, everything's getting better and cheaper. You know, it's a free market. And the other is run by government health care. I mentioned earlier, I was talking about this lady I read about from Bangladesh. She was a maid, and she was bragging she had the same cell phone as the President of the United States. That's an egalitarian outcome that the left professes they want. Okay? But I can assure you she's not getting the same health care or the same, you know, retirement benefits, you know, or the education. You know, her kids are not getting the same education and health care as the President's kids, because those are run by government monopolies. Yeah. And he's able to, you know, opt out. I can probably get private, sends his kids to private schools.
Let's talk about education. You know, school choice. Now I know that's more of a state issue, but this whole notion that I can't get either a tax credit or a voucher to give the best education to my children. It's a big issue, I know, for a lot of families. But another concern...
It's all about the grown-ups, not about the children. That's
why. Right.
You know, a lot of it's driven by the unions.
What about Common Core, too?
I'm absolutely against it. I'm for getting rid of the Department of Education. It's not in the Constitution. They spent $1 trillion, and in the last 40 years, there was a promise to the unions. They'll like Carter, and I think they put it in '77. And results have either flatlined or declined. Math and science have declined. You know, and in the last 40 years, I mean, the goal has been for the unions, and I say unions because it affects South Carolina policy, because when they look at, you know, regulations, they say, well, here's how they do it in all the other states, so they adopt it. But I mean, school enrollment has gone up by 9%, I think, throughout the country, you know, in the last 40 years. But the number of employees has gone up like 10, it's gone up 110%, so that's like 11 or 12 times more. Well, the reason for that is you know, the unions want more dues-paying members. They know they can't, it's not palatable to just increase the dues of a union member, so they say, let's get more of these people. So education costs have, I think, tripled, you know, and adjusted for inflation. Because they've got all these union employees and, you know, more union dues-paying members. And, you know, talk about the unions, I mean, and the public sector workers, I mean, they're getting paid a lot more than the private sector workers. Their benefits are extremely much more higher. And a lot of that has to do with the unions. Even FDR himself said he didn't want unions involved in the government because he knew. Everyone knows. I mean, when you're negotiating, you know, they're on both sides of the table. You got the union officials on one side and they're bought and paid for politicians on the other. And who gets the shaft? The taxpayer. Yeah. So unions got into government with Kennedy, you know, because it was a payback to the union bosses who delivered, I think, West Virginia for him in the primary. So, yeah, we've got to get rid of the unions. I mean, they've driven up the cost of education. And, yeah, I don't know if you've seen Stupid in America by John Stossel. Yeah, even these socialist countries in Europe, like Belgium, yeah, they say, okay, we'll pay for education, give everybody a voucher. Okay, go to any school you want. You've got schools competing for these dollars that are following the kids around. And the parents, they do care. Some people say, well, the parents don't care. I said, well, you know, in the standard, I don't really read up on cars, but I know I'm going to get a good car just because competition drives quality up and costs down. You know, when the Berlin Wall fell, the Triebbank, the product of Eastern Europe, Eastern Germany, went out of business immediately. Okay, that's the nature of competition. These students from the poorest performing schools in Belgium were laughing at the students from the best performing schools in America on these certain standardized tests that they were acing and American students were flunking. And, you know, higher ed, we allow choice. You know, you may get a Pell Grant, but you can go anywhere you want. You don't say, okay, you live here, you have to go to this college. You know, so you get the school-run monopoly, there's no incentive to make anything better. You know, and you got one-size rules coming out of Washington. And when they say we need standards, all that means is that they dumb it down as much as possible, and then everybody teaches to the test, so they can get the more money out of Washington, and it's all about compliance.
Yeah.
It's all about complying with all the rules and regulations. It's just absurd to me. Healthcare, education. People think the government's got to run it. I talked to this lady the other day, and I said, how'd you like the government to be in the business, have the sole monopoly on the design, manufacturing, and distribution of shoes? She said, that's absurd. They'd all be black, they'd be, they wouldn't be very stylish and ill-fitting. And I said, well, if you wouldn't trust the government with something as trivial as your shoes, why would you entrust the government with something as important as your health care and your child's education? So, the answer to all of this is we've got to get the government out of it. We need free markets. And but there's so many, the bureaucracy and the special interests that are so involved. I think the whole thing gets back to consolidated benefits, diffuse costs. Take sugar. The reason the sugar in this country is twice the world cost is because the Fanjul family, they'll hire the lobbyists to go pay off the politicians, and let's say it costs $1 million. Well, they'll reap $100 million in excess profits from that. But you and I aren't going to go to Washington and hire a lobbyist so we can get a packet of sugar for a tenth of a penny cheaper. So I think we need more principled politicians who aren't going to be paid off. And then there's a log rolling that goes on. About the log rolling where the senators in Florida, they get together with the senators from the dairy states. They're trying to raise the price of, milk. And then they'll get together with the farmers in the Midwest, or the senators who represent the farmers in the Midwest. They'll get together and they'll pass this incredible farm bill, and which will raise the price for the average family by $200 a year. But then they got to get the Democrats to come along and say, well, we'll buy you off by voting to increase food stamps.
Yeah, compromise.
Yeah. And so the average consumer / taxpayer gets the shaft again. Yeah. Because the two parties are colluding basically to milk the American people to satisfy their benefactors so that they can stay in office. And that's why I don't want to be a part of the two-party system.
I have one more question. Let's talk about social issues. As you know, you're a new dad,
right?
And a lot of people are wondering, where do you stand with the life issue, pro-life issues, and also
life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I believe in life and protection of life and adoption. I'm against abortion. I think it's abhorrent. And so, on that issue, it's right there in the Declaration, the preamble to the Constitution is the Declaration of Independence, life. The government is charged to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Should the government be involved with marriage?
No, I don't. I think it's a religious ceremony, and they should not be involved with marriage, but they are. And if they're going to be in the business of conferring benefits on married heterosexual couples, if you take the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution seriously, whereby we extend the privileges and immunity clause to all the states so that the states can't violate our rights, you're going to have to confer, those same benefits on gay couples. So, it's a matter of, fair treatment under the law. But frankly, I would like to get the government out of all marriage. And, the whole thing is when you get into the business of saying you can't do this and everybody wants to do it. Lindsey Graham was out there saying we need a constitutional amendment to ban flag burning. Well, there's no epidemic of flag burning, but the moment you pass a constitutional amendment to ban it, everybody's going to be out there burning it because the flag represents your freedom to burn it. It represents freedom. The moment you pass that constitutional amendment to ban it, then it represents coercion. It represents big government coercion trying to control your life. So, I think there's a cognitive dissonance with me. If I went for a small, limited government, how could I then want a government that's going to look into someone's heart and tell them who they can love or who they can marry? To me, it creates I don't know how your readers are going to accept that, but that's That's my fly. You have to be consistent across the board.
You know, as far as getting your message out, you know, you're up against somebody that has millions of dollars. Most of it's from out of state.
Right.
How are you going to get your message out? What's the ground game plan going forward?
Well, a lot of it's earned media, talking to people like you. You know, hopefully on a debate. You know, nobody watches these debates, but if I can create some fireworks, a million people will watch it on YouTube the next day. So I'm sure he's not going to want to debate me. And, you know, I'm not a man without resources, you know, and I think I have the ability to raise money nationally and statewide. I think the libertarian brand is appreciating this conservative brand, this faux conservative brand is depreciating. You know, he calls himself a conservative. He's not. The brand itself is just.
What does it mean to be? Yeah, I'm conservative.
Yeah.
I mean, that conservative that you know, constant government expansion.
Yeah, you know, raising debt ceiling 6 times. You know, voting against
17 trillion.
sequestration, which is only going to slightly reduce the growth of the military. Raising taxes with you know, raising payroll taxes on tens of millions of Americans. How is that conservative?
Right.
You know, running up $140 trillion national debt. You know, if you do the accounting the way private business does it, which doesn't just take into account past debts but future obligations. You know, we have $140 trillion debt. How is that conservative?
Yeah.
You know, I think the true conservative is a libertarian.
Yeah.
So.
Well, wow, this is you know, we covered a lot of issues. Is there anything else you would like to say?
To consider me seriously as a candidate. I will take seriously the Constitution. I believe in the division of powers. You know, the legislative, judiciary, executive, and Lindsey Graham doesn't. He thinks it's the president's prerogative to handpick his judiciary.
All right.
You know, he said, well, you know, we got to change the White House. No, you don't. It says advising consent. I would not have consented to Kagan and Sotomayor, which were the swing votes to pass Obamacare, which is going to be like the VA, which we're all going to see what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
I'd be up there to right now filibustering those appointees.
Yeah. You know, that's a total cop-out because, you know, he said that, well, I don't have a choice, elections have consequences. But Senator Sessions voted against Sotomayor and Kagan as well.
I think McCain did too.
You know, I think a lot of people are frustrated because there's no one really leadership that has that fortitude and has that voice. That, you know, where people see that's my guy and he listens to me. So I appreciate you jumping in. I think it's great that South Carolinians have a choice, and I just know a lot of people that believe in the Constitution. They are not going to vote for Graham, and you know, I hope that things go well for you, and best of luck.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.